Hello, everyone, and welcome back to CLI's Legalpreneurs Spotlight Future 50 series. I'm Terry Mottishead, the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law, and I'm your host for this series. In Future 50, we're chatting with global thought leaders and doers in legal innovation and legal tech, and showcasing the new and different ways that they see the legal world and are contributing to its transformation. Today, I'm joined by the wonderful Heidi Brown to chat about her new book, The Flourishing Lawyer, A Multi-Dimensional Approach to Performance and Wellbeing. Great title, by the way, Heidi. Heidi is a professor of law and the director of legal writing at Brooklyn Law School in the US. Heidi's been unpacking the lawyer psyche for a while now, and having been there and done that too, she was a practicing lawyer and she's done lots more. A huge welcome to you, Heidi, and thanks so much for joining us today from New York.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, it's a wonderful title, The Flourishing Lawyer, A Multi-Dimensional Approach to Performance and Wellbeing. But it's the third book in a series where you've been kind of focused on thinking about what being a lawyer means to each of us and what lawyering is or could be. So I know there's a story there. So tell us, what led you to writing in and about this space?
Really, when I became a law professor, I noticed that my students were grappling with a lot of the things that I wrestled with as an attorney. As you mentioned, I was a lawyer. I was a construction litigator in the US for about 15 straight years before I started teaching law. But I was a quiet person. I love writing. I love legal writing. And that was really the place in my legal career where I found that sort of state of flow, where when I'm writing a brief, I can kind of forget that the world exists. But the performance aspects of lawyering were always really challenging for me. I had extreme public speaking anxiety. I have this really robust blushing response, which you'll probably even see on camera today. So taking, combative depositions or going to court or negotiating, I could do those things and I was intellectually prepared, but I was very nervous. I had extreme anxiety, extreme fear, public speaking anxiety, all of that. So when I walked into my first law school classroom as a professor, I was still scared. I was worried my students could see, my blushing, my heart was racing, but I was prepared to teach. And as I was teaching legal writing over that first year, this was now 13, 14 years ago, I noticed that my brightest legal writing students, my most creative problem solvers, my deepest thinkers, my most collaborative team players were my quietest students, the ones that never raised their hand in class, but they were also the ones who were the most afraid of the performance aspects of law school. So at the time, my huge passion towards writing about these topics was toward figuring out a way to amplify the voices of our quiet students, of our future lawyers who were like me, that were, good at writing or good at certain other skills, but scared of speaking about the law. And we know that we have to speak about the law. So I started researching introversion. And because I knew that I was an introvert and I love being an introvert. In fact, working at home during the pandemic, I was fine. Like I can thrive in my own world because it was quiet. So I started researching the differences among introversion and extroversion, and also the difference between introversion and shyness and social anxiety, totally different ballparks. That led to me writing a book called The Introverted Lawyer, where I talk about the assets and the gifts that quiet people bring to the profession, but also how we can amplify our voices authentically, sort of getting rid of those fake it till you make it or just do it messages, but instead just getting to know ourselves. So that was the first well-being book. You want me to continue with the journey?
Absolutely. Yeah, please.
Okay. So ironically, for a person who has extreme public speaking anxiety, that book led to me becoming a public speaker. I was going around to law firms and bar associations and law schools talking about, again, the gifts that quiet students and quiet lawyers bring to the profession, like empathy and thoughtful problem solving, collaboration, good writing, all those sorts of things. And I would have people come up to me afterwards or reach out over email or LinkedIn or other social media, and they would say, I'm not an introvert. I'm actually a really gregarious, outgoing extrovert in my personal life, but I'm scared. I'm scared to, stand up to that difficult partner in my law firm, or I'm scared to negotiate against that kind of difficult opposing counsel, or I'm scared to do my first trial. So again, as a person who really wrestled with fear throughout my life, still I do. I mean, it's a thing, it's a go-to emotion for me. I started researching science of fear and what happens to our physical bodies when we experience fear. We've all heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response, but I didn't really understand what that truly meant physiologically. And so I read every book I could get my hands on about the science of fear and how other industries like medicine, medical professions, sports, other entrepreneurs, engineering schools, how they were addressing fear in the students that they were training or the people they were training in those particular professions. And I thought, no one had really been writing about this in the legal profession. In the legal profession, we're kind of taught, fake it, never show fear. And I tried that for 15 years of law practice. And the first 10 years of being a law teacher, I tried to pretend I wasn't scared, and that never worked for me. You could see it all over my face. Yeah. So I wrote another book called Untangling Fear in Lawyering. I like the verb untangle because I feel like our society promotes all these kind of unhelpful messages about fear. Just face your fears every day. Do something every day that scares you. Like we have to get up every day and be terrified to be a contributing member of society. So I just decided to reject all those messages and untangle fear, get to know. I always apply my stuff to myself first. And I had to learn physiologically what was happening to me. I started taking boxing lessons, which is why there's boxing gloves on the cover of that book and the new book. And it changed my life. It changed the way I approach everything about my profession and everything about my personal life. It didn't make my fear go away, but it made me able to perform with my fear, knowing much more about the physicality of fear. So then I started reading a couple books. Well, one is by Dr. Martin Seligman. He wrote a book called Flourish. He's in the positive psychology field, one of the founding fathers of positive psychology, a field that's only about 22, 23 years old. And I read a book called Flow by another psychologist, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And I realized as I was reading those books that a lot of the principles I had written about in my Introverted Lawyer book and my Untangling Fear book were grounded in the science of positive psychology. And that led to me trying to understand what Martin Seligman really meant by the concept of flourishing. And then I wanted to apply all of that to the legal profession. I just felt like, again, in the law, we have this bravado mentality of never show weakness. The profession has taken great strides toward cultivating a space where we can talk about well-being, but I just felt like there was so much more we could be doing. And I wanted to write a book where I took a lot of the science of positive psychology and psychology in general and sort of placed it in the legal profession, but approaching it from sort of an athlete or performer's mindset. And so that's what led to the new book, which just came out recently.
It's just a fantastic body of work. And I just couldn't recommend all of the books more highly. I mean, I think it's great. And, it's that multidisciplinary approach to the subject area, I think, that really distinguishes it in many respects from others. But, as I was listening to you then, the thing that's so interesting to me is that as the legal ecosystem is becoming more and more digitized, technology is, I guess, ramping up and coming to the forefront. It's all of those qualities that you were speaking to, the ability to empathize, to be brave, I guess, in many respects, to have a sense of that curiosity, all of those things that to me, and many more, of course, that are hallmarks of our humanity, are actually coming more and more to the forefront, aren't they?
They absolutely are. Curiosity, creativity, and empathy and humanity, you're so right. All these things, especially in the last 2 years, we're realizing are so important. And they're aspects of being a lawyer that we don't talk about that much, especially, I teach in a law school, and we try to weave those topics in, and especially in my legal writing class. But I think there's so much doctrine and substantive law and rules and regulations that we're trying to pack into legal education and legal training, that a lot of these truly pivotal topics get overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other thing that was jumping out, and I want to jump into the new book in a second, but the other thing that was jumping out to me was that profile is really quite different from what we would have typically associated with a lawyer, and kind of speaks, I think, to the fact that as we sit here today, the talent and capabilities that we need are quite different. And we need to hear from the folks who are thinking about things quite differently. And so all of the things that you're kind of identifying are just even more important to be engaging with folks that, as you say, may not be the first people to speak up in a meeting.
Right. And if we don't focus on the strengths that these individuals have and acknowledge them, we're going to miss out on a tremendous, amazing group of voices that are thinking about change and are thinking about how to solve really difficult problems, societal problems, legal problems, worldwide problems. If we keep listening to the same voices for whom, talking about this stuff comes more easily, we're not digging deeper into some insights that remain hidden unless we create a space for people to feel comfortable talking about it. And we teach people how to empower themselves and amplify their voices authentically. I tried for years to mirror the behavior of my much more confident counterparts, and that made me feel physically terrible because it wasn't natural for me to pretend like that. And I wish I could go back and redo 15 years of angst-ridden law practice, knowing what I know now, because I could have shared ideas that I just kept hidden because I didn't know how to articulate them.
Yeah, but as tough as it was, what you experienced then got you to where you are now, I guess, even though we might have liked to kind of avoid some of that in between, right?
Right. No, I really wouldn't change I had a very serpentine path, and I worked at 3 law firms. I've worked at 3 law schools. I've pivoted many times, and I don't regret any of those experiences. I mean, many of those experiences were very hard and very, some of them even traumatic, but I feel like they've informed this work that I'm doing now and led me to be a writer. I always really wanted to call myself a writer, not a lawyer. And now the writing is the persona that I'm most proud of. And I try to encourage my the future lawyers of the world, my students, to think that way too. You're not just a law student. You're not just a lawyer. You're also an artist or an athlete or a performer, a creator, a collaborator, a problem solver, a rock star, whatever that brings you that inner spirit to actually be a better lawyer.
I think I'm getting close to having to surrender my rock star ambitions, but now I'm encouraged to kind of keep them alive. But listen, let's jump into your new book, The Flourishing Lawyer. And the first question that we've got to ask is, what do lawyers need to flourish?
Well, what I learned, I actually went and got my master's in positive psychology last year to understand the concept of flourishing more. And it really opened my eyes to how my prior approach to well-being was kind of wrong or limited. Because what I learned is that well-being or flourishing is not just about feeling good. Well-being is not just about having a smile on our faces all the time. Especially as lawyers, our jobs are hard. As members of society, our jobs are hard. Our lives are hard. So it's not just feeling good, which is called hedonic well-being. It's also this concept called eudaimonia, the EU meaning Greek for good, and that's functioning well. So as lawyers, for us to flourish and why we should flourish as lawyers, we want to feel good and enjoy what we're doing, but but that's not always going to be the case. We're going to have rough days, bad days, stress. Stress is normal. We're not going to eliminate stress. We're not going to eliminate fear either. But if we set up systems where we're functioning well, we can ride out those challenges, the inevitable challenges of being in a tough, demanding profession or being a member of society. Like, there's always things that are going to be challenging. It's the functioning well. That's the piece that I feel our profession can do a much better job of, setting up systems and processes for every individual to thrive and flourish, not just survive the practice of law. So I mean, I didn't make that up. That came from, the whole field of positive psychology, where I get the science from as the foundation for my books. That's really kind of the approach I've taken in this new book, that we can set up systems for ourselves, and we're all individuals. So there's not one size fits all. There's not a one size fits all approach to this. In fact, because the boxing helped me so much in untangling my fear and really helping me become able to get up in front of large groups of people and speak without freaking out, I was trying to take an athlete and performer approach to this Flourishing Lawyer book. And I discovered in my research, there's a Russian sports psychologist named Dr. Yuri Hanin. And back in the 60s and 70s, he developed this concept called IZOF, I-Z-O-F, and it's the individual zone of optimal functioning. And he studied all these athletes and determined that every athlete has an individualized zone where positive and negative emotions, their little concoction of positive and negative emotions, can put them either in or out of their optimal performance zone. And it's not a one-size-fits-all training model zone where every athlete in the same sport has the same zone. We're all unique and individual. And I thought, wow, if lawyers thought that way, we'd understand that, some of us like working in total silence. Some of us like to have noise around. Some of us need to close our office doors to get our best work done. Others like to bounce ideas off each other. Some work best in the morning. Some work best in the evening. Some work best at the last minute. Some don't. So taking sort of this athlete and performer approach to lawyering, we can give ourselves regard as athletes and performers, and realize that just like athletes and performers don't just focus on the one skill that brings them glory on the field or on the stage, neither should we. We should not just focus on our intellect. We should, like athletes and performers, focus on multiple dimensions of our performance and our well-being, so that when we hit those tough days, we're able to function well, and we put routines and rituals and systems in place to allow our best performance to shine through. So the book goes into 10 dimensions of well-being that help us to perform better.
But it's a radical approach, and I use that word very deliberately for the way that we've kind of thought about probably lawyers and lawyering, because it used to be you'd come out of law school, you'd go into probably a large law firm, and your career would be linear. And, you just keep progressing towards it. And I guess to me, it's been a combination of a realization, the sort of realizations that you're speaking to. But I think as we sit here today, frankly, also to some extent, because we've got to look for silver linings in COVID, it's kind of also COVID related, because it has required people to not just think differently about their career, but work really differently, to create opportunities to work remotely, for their employers to also have to take that on board, and to how that all gets packaged together, that it so that it isn't a one size fits all. It isn't you enter a law firm and it's a linear career. Maybe it's a portfolio career. Maybe you choose different things. You focus on strengths and you don't focus exclusively on weaknesses. Do you think that as we sit here now today, that we're in a situation where there's a greater opportunity to be able to do and pursue the sorts of things that you write about in your new book?
I absolutely do. I'm excited. I'm encouraged. A couple of things that you just said made me think of. I agree with you entirely that in the past, or even still now, law students, I think, believe that there's one definition of what it means to be a successful law student or a law graduate, and it's that linear path. You're doing all the, quote, prestigious things in law school, getting the right grades, getting the right job, landing that big law firm job. But I meet with law students all the time who feel somewhat strange because they don't want that, but they're afraid to say that out loud. And that is so exciting. I love those conversations because when we can explain to a law student that none of that, they don't have to do any of that if they don't want to. They can choose a completely new path. The world is completely open to them. But I don't think that message gets across as often as it should, that there are myriad paths to being a, quote, successful law student, even if you don't have the best grades. I didn't have the best grades in law school, and I tell my students that all the time. I thought when I went to my first firm, I would stay there forever, work my way up the partnership track, and that didn't happen. Mainly because I hit a speed bump in my personal life, and I moved away from the state I grew up in, and I had to start completely over. But each time I reinvented myself, and that is possible and actually fun. And I mean, not always fun while it's happening, but fun later in retrospect to look back and think, wow, if I had stayed on that one linear path, I never would have had these amazing life experiences that I've had. So I feel like we need to model that for the newer generation of law students. And then in terms of strengths, another thing that I focus on in the book, I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but in the United States, every lawyer has to complete what's called a character and fitness assessment to be admitted into each jurisdiction. Okay, so if it's the same, that's good. But I feel like in law school, we don't talk enough about what it means to have character and what it means to be fit to practice law. We tend to focus on intellectual fitness. And my students constantly ask me, hey, can you fill out can you do a character and fitness affidavit for me? And I check the boxes and I sign my name, but I feel like it's a matter of checking boxes rather than really talking deeply at the starting gate of law school about what it means to have character, and that we all have different character strengths. So another piece of research that I discovered in my positive psychology courses and also in writing the book was there's an institute called the Values in Action, the VIA Institute on Character. And they've come up with this scientifically validated survey. It's an assessment where you answer a bunch of questions and then it's free. Then you get a report listing your character strengths. They've studied 24 character strengths that they've situated within 6 virtues. Wow. And it's so fascinating because you get this report and you get a list of your top 5 signature strengths, they call them, and then your middle strengths and your lower strengths. I like that they don't call them weaknesses. But your signature strengths, there's the data says that there's 5.1 million different constellations of the top 5 signature strengths. I think that's so cool. Wow. That means 5.1 million. That means we all have different signature strengths. So we all bring different strengths to lawyering. And I feel like that if we focused on character through that lens or a lens similar to that, or through a well-being lens, instead of boxes that we check on a form or looking at character as something you either have or you don't on a certain date, that doesn't do enough for what we're talking about here. And we can cultivate character. It's something we can grow and nurture and deepen instead of it just being something you're either born with or not. Is my philosophy, at least. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, surely your character has to be connected with your life experience, right? You'd hope that you'd grow, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. And when I got my VIA character strengths report, I was very happy to see, my top 5, my signature strengths are things like perseverance. And I kind of rolled my eyes. I'm like, I'm tired of persevering. I'm exhausted. Like perseverance, curiosity, creativity, 2 of the things that you mentioned. zest is one of them. And that has come from travel experiences and love of learning. And then when I looked at the bottom of the list, so my lowest strengths, my number 23 and 24, get this, are leadership and teamwork. And I literally lead a team as part of my job. So I thought, oh no, does that mean I'm terrible at my job? But as I researched it further, it doesn't. It means that your top strengths, the researchers say, are 3 E's. They energize, excite, and come easily for you. The bottom ones, you can still be highly functioning in those areas, but they might take energy out of you. They might sap energy. And that is completely what happens with me. I can do those things. I have to as part of my job and my career, but I'm exhausted. Whereas the things that excite and energize me, I love writing. I love, traveling. I love teaching. So it's such an eye opener for me on how we can highlight people's strengths. And then to your point, not everybody has to do the same linear career path if that's not where their particular strengths are leading them. And they can experiment because, as you also pointed out, it takes life experience to understand how your strengths can be best used and what makes life and work most enjoyable for each individual.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, and I'm kind of drawing some threads together here and somewhat coming full circle, but I do wonder if as a group, lawyers are conditioned almost against prioritizing their own well-being. What are your thoughts on that?
I do think that has been the case in the past. I do. I think maybe it's starting to change, but it's been drilled into our minds since law school that intellectual performance, your substantive knowledge, your intellectual performance comes first, and the client comes first, and you stay as late as it takes at the office to get the work done, and you sacrifice vacations and holidays and relationships. But I think it has to change, first of all. And I fear that some of the stakeholders think that by tending to our well-being, it's going to reduce the rigor of our profession. That is so not true. And that's why I like this athlete model, because athletes and performers, because I know the athlete model isn't going to resonate for everybody, but athletes and performers have built-in rest days. I mean, a singer cannot sing every day of the week, or they will, I don't know if it's every day of the week, whatever their timeline is, they have to rest. And athletes purposely schedule days of rest and recovery so their muscles get stronger. We have to do the same thing for ourselves. We can have much more longevity in our legal careers if we understand that model, instead of just working and doing that whole bravado, play hurt kind of mentality. I worked in law firms where I learned a lot. I worked for some brilliant people, but we worked all the time. And it took a toll on our relationships and our health and definitely our happiness.
Yeah.
So I don't think we need to reduce the intellectual rigor of the profession if we understand this athlete performer model and build in rest and recovery times that'll help our performance that'll enhance our performance.
I think we're also at a tipping point with that, where we've got this opportunity, and I do think it's an opportunity to seize or lose, where we can look at digitization, we can look at technology, or if you like, the digital resource or labor, and how that gets augmented or coupled with the human resource or human labor. And in the current environment where a lot is changing and in flux, to see how we bring those things together and to reorganize our lives around this. I just think we're sitting at that point now, and I so hope that we seize the day and that we don't kind of ignore this and just push on. And I'm wondering if we might close with your thoughts and reaction to that.
I agree. And I'm hopeful that we can seize the day as well. I think it also comes down to fear. I think that a lot of our profession's hesitation to change is fear-based. And and we need to untangle that fear and understand what is our resistance to digitizing, to technology. I know for me, when I first had to start teaching online, I was afraid. I thought, can I do this? And we did it. We did it. And so many positive things came out of that. I don't want to go off on a whole long tangent, but I saw, in terms of quiet students, teaching on Zoom and having features like the chat feature and electronic hand raising, that was a game changer for quiet students. Because I'm that way in meetings. I don't want to interrupt somebody to be heard. I will never unmute myself and interrupt somebody, but I can use that hand raise feature, and I can articulate my thoughts in the chat and think about it and hit send, and I'm heard. So I do think that a lot of our resistance in the legal profession to change is fear-based, but if together we as a community can name those fears and talk about them and untangle them, and then experiment and be willing to make mistakes and not get it perfect the first time, I think we can seize the day.
Fantastic. I mean, folks, do take a look at the Flourishing Lawyer, but take a look at the Introverted Lawyer and Untangling Fear in Lawyering as well. Again, Heidi, an amazing body of work, just contributing so much to lawyer wellbeing around the world, and delighted that you could join us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really love talking to you, and I'm happy to talk to you anytime.